We're expecting about 30 people to join us today, which is really exciting. In addition to this Zoom live feed that we have, we also have it playing on Facebook. So if you are on Facebook and you'd like to share it with your friends, please do so. Any more eyes we can get on this, the better. Because as we know, as you're joining us here today, that anybody who participates more in the electoral process and understands it more, that means that we're going to have better candidates running for us. So with that, let me do a time check. Let me let a few more folks join in. We're just a minute after the top of the hour, and we'll get started. As a refresher, today we are going to talk about the difference between mail-in voting and absentee voting, and why everybody has an opinion about it and why it's so controversial. We are going to dive right into the facts. So give me a little bit of time and we'll see as more people join. All right, so we'll get started here. Thank you for joining us again. My name is Rhiannon Samuel. I am the Executive Director of Viante, New Mexico. Viante, New Mexico is a nonpartisan nonprofit aimed at providing transparency around our state elected officials to see who is working together to fix our education, crime, and quality of life issues in New Mexico. In addition to this, we try to provide as many resources that we can get our hands on or that we can curate to help voters become more educated, not only on the candidates, like what we do with our monitoring of the roundhouse, but just knowing that when you get into the election booth, what you're looking at, why you have a say in it, and then all the different things that you may see splashed along the headlines and just want some more information on. This is our second live webinar. We don't know how many we're going to do. We will see how everybody is responding to it, if it's being positive or if there's more topics we can dive into, but we are certainly having fun here. I am not the lone person at Viante. We also have Anna Mallory. She is our community outreach manager who has been fabulously working remotely, like me, to set up presentations remotely on Zoom and Skype and different things so we can get our message out there. So if you know of any groups who are going to start conducting business like that, I know there are a few Rotaries and Kiwanis clubs that are doing it. Please reach out to us. We would love to share what we're doing with them, and that way we can get more educated voters this year in 2020, where it's so important. And I will touch on that a little bit later. So what are we talking about now? So we are talking about what's the beef with mail-in voting anyway. From the onset, it seems like it makes a great deal of sense when people are pretty much quarantined at home and you don't want them mass gathering. So, but there are some nuances there that the opponents bring up very loudly, so that way they can avoid election fraud, any interference, different things that would impact our American right to vote and to have the candidate that is chosen by the people. So we'll dive into those issues. I do want to clarify from the onset that we at Viante do not take a position one way or another when it comes to providing transparency around the election process. So what I am hopefully going to do today, you can let me know after the fact if I'm able to accomplish it, is to outline the pros and cons of mail-in voting, absentee voting, so that way you can make up your own mind on whether or not it's something we should pursue. At the end of everything, I will try and answer as many questions as I can. I certainly don't know everything, and if there's a question that is asked and I don't know, I will get back to you. I'll mention it at the end, but you can use the little chat box. I don't know how everyone's screen is configured, but typically it's down at the bottom of your screen. I'll tune into those right after the presentation. It should be relatively short. And with that, this is really what brings us here today. You may have seen different headlines like reports of vote by mail ballots undelivered, tossed aside by postal workers, or Republicans need to get serious about the 2020 vote by mail battle heats up. Another one, let's put the vote by mail fraud myth to test. And then even at the very top of our government levels, our elected officials are talking about it. Our own Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, tweeted on April 8th, absentee ballots are a great way to vote for many senior citizens, military, and others who can't get to the polls on election day. These ballots are very different and 100% mail-in voting, which is ripe for fraud and should not be allowed. What he's referencing there is what we'll talk about in a little bit, but clearly he has some opinions about it, as he does on a lot of things. And so what we're left with in the public is to try and figure out what's the truth through it all. And that's what we're covering today. We're first going to talk about what is mail-in voting and absentee voting. Oh, my little transitions didn't work out right. The realities of working during the global pandemic, voting during the global pandemic. How does this look for New Mexico? How do we compare to other states? The pros and cons of each option, how New Mexico is responding, and important election dates here in New Mexico that hopefully you can take a little picture of or a screen grab, but you should certainly have somewhere on your refrigerator because it's all of our duties as American citizens to participate in this process. So let's start first with absentee voting. There's a lot of confusion around what the differences are between absentee and mail-in. Absentee has been going on for a long time for many states, and states have different requirements around it. But what does that even mean? For absentee voting, the definition is a vote cast by a person who, because of an absence from unusual voting districts or illness or something of the like, is permitted to vote by mail. To vote in absentee, 16 states allow it. Now, those 16 states have different requirements for it. Some say that you need to have a notary public sign your reason to have an absentee ballot. Your reason could be that you don't have transportation, you're in the hospital, you're elderly, and you just simply can't get out into public as you once were. So some states ask for that. Others, so 1/3 of states, so that's 1/3 of states. 2/3 of those 16 states do not require an excuse at all. You can request an absentee for just convenience sake. If you want to spend more time with it at home, you don't know who all is on there, and you really want to look at what they stand for or what the impacts of perhaps a bond or a resolution would have on your family. So that is what an absentee ballot does. Now for mail-in voting, a handful of states have this. Those include 5 states like Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Utah, Washington, which all hold their mail-in elections for registered voters. And that's in part due to the geographic challenges that those states face. They also have different things where for them, it may be more cost effective than staffing up all of the polling locations that they're required to, and it may be because they want to increase voter turnout. So what has this meant so far? So where are we at in terms of COVID-19? A lot of us staying at home and practicing social distancing. This means that a lot of political parties in each state are trying to get one thing passed or another, may it be all mail-in voting or not. In fact, we just saw it in our primary season, which we are in the thick of. Many states have already had their caucuses or primaries to select a candidate from each party, and they're concerned about having people get out in the midst of us spreading this virus. And so what we have recently seen is in Wisconsin, where the governor was going back and forth around what they wanted to do when it comes to mail-in voting or vote by or going in person, and even delaying it. But their Supreme Court said that they still had to hold their primary elections. And people who did not request an absentee ballot before were forced to go and wait in these lines. The challenge that presented for them were that the polling locations weren't fully staffed up. They had to wait for a long time outside, keeping that 6-foot distance in the cold. And so many people were frustrated with the way that it turned out. However, they were able to get their election results earlier than others who have subsequently delayed their primaries. But this really was an indicator for what the rest of the country is going to face for voting in all of these elections, and what kind of protections we're going to have to provide. This was also a great indicator for the general election, which is coming up on November 3rd, where not only for New Mexico's sake, we have the president, we have a Senate seat, and all 112 of state legislators on the ballot. How are we going to address the concerns we have around social distancing, slowing the spread of this virus, where experts say we're going to deal with it for the rest of the year, but still getting those votes in, because we cannot delay a general election. So we have to figure out, what are we going to do between now and then? So in New Mexico, what do we have right now? We actually have a fairly open system. We have all voters can vote by mail without an excuse. And really, when it says by mail, that's an absentee ballot. So when you request your absentee ballot, you don't need to say that you're elderly, don't have transportation, you have some sort of illness. You can do it for whatever reason you would like. Well, you don't even have to state a reason, quite frankly. Online mail ballot requests are available statewide. This is unique because not all states have this available to them. Within our online portal, which I will give you in a few slides soon, you can not only request your absentee ballot, but you can also update your voter information. If you feel like, let's say you're a Republican and you would rather vote in the Democrat primary, and perhaps you lean both ways. Well, now is the time for you to change that voter registration to do so. Or in my case, I'm an independent, or more specifically a decline to state. If I chose to have my voice cast in one of these primaries, I would have to go onto that website, update my voter registration, and then I'm allowed to vote in those. But as an independent, we don't have open primaries in New Mexico, so I'm not able to. You do not have to have an ID requirement to vote by mail. Some states do, where they have either their voter registration card, or once they even filled out their ballot, they have to have it signed by a notary public. New Mexico does not. So it's pretty simple. You request it, comes in, you fill it out, you mail it back. And as I just mentioned, you don't need a notary or a witness requirement for the return of the ballot. And then finally, we have prepaid postage statewide. It may seem like it's something that's a no-brainer, that all states who offer absentee ballots or vote by mail would just do that, but it's often a conversation, and it's also about access for people who perhaps cannot afford postage, and so New Mexico has it prepaid across the board. Now, what are the pros and cons, or the benefits and risks for voting by mail? And this is specific to just voting by mail without the absentee request of it all. Let me just check in real quick. To answer a quick question here, yes, a copy of the PowerPoint will be made available to those who participated today. So let's see. Pros and cons. So pros. There's voter convenience and satisfaction. As I had mentioned before, you can take as much time as you want with your ballot. That means that if you need to dive into an issue more, you want to learn more about the candidates, perhaps even reach out to them, which you can do, that's what you can do, and see it and fill it out as time permits for you at your convenience. More time with the ballot. Staff cost savings. And so that is where, when we have people at the voting locations, theoretically, if you have a vote by mail, you would not have to staff up as much and have more than the minimum required polling locations. So there's that cost savings. Also, there's the assumption that you would have increased participation, where people who had never really thought about going to the voting booths will go or not go, but they'll fill out their ballot and mail it back in. So far, what national statistics have seen is that there's a minor increase, but nothing too drastic thus far. Now the cons. Although I had mentioned that staffing cost savings are in the pros, the immediate cost of supplies is pretty remarkable. From postage to the paper to getting people a solid way to capture all of that information, those costs stack up. And those are reoccurring ones because you're always going to have to print the ballot. You're always going to have to pay for postage. It can be tough. Errors in voting. So if somebody fills out their ballot, but not correctly, perhaps they do an X where they're really supposed to fill in the bubble, or if they fill in two different bubbles, there's always instructions are provided. And of course, this is a risk even in-person voting, but it's an additional risk with mail-in. There's a tradition element too that would be lost by having voting by mail, where whole families will go into the voting booth. I know when I was growing up, I would go right into the voting booth and pull the little shower curtain, and it was something that I knew that once I turned of age, it's something I would have to do. So that tradition is lost. Of course, new traditions could be made, but that's something that the opponents bring up. The mail delivery disparity. So if you're living in somewhere like Albuquerque, mail disparity is not as bad. But if you're somewhere on like a reservation or in rural New Mexico, that's where the concern lies, where the delivery may not be as regular, or you may have a P.O. box and you have to commute to get there to get your ballot, and you may even forget it's there or not get it in time. There's a challenge. There's opportunities for coercion. What you might be hearing on the news right now is ballot harvesting. And what that looks like is when a particular party or a particular interest group goes door to door and knocks on the door and says, hey, you may have already received your ballot, even if you didn't request one. Here's what's on there. I really would encourage you to vote for this. Or this one is really concerning. It would be better for you and your family if you didn't vote for that. So that makes the barrier of having influence in your voting decision a little bit more blurred. When you have a voting location, they have specific rules where you can't be so close within a polling district, you can't be campaigning. So that's where lines get a little blurred. And then there's slower reporting. Of course, each Secretary of State, county clerk, city clerk even, they have requirements on when you need to mail your ballot back in. But with snail mail, you still have some delay time. And so you won't have your results as quickly if that's something that's important to you. I know it certainly is to the political analysts, so they can get their answers as soon as possible. So there is a lot to consider when it comes to the pros and cons here. But what is happening here in New Mexico? What happened a couple weeks ago is the New Mexico High Court rejected a petition for an all mail-in election. This is something that the Secretary of State, Maggie Toulouse-Oliver, had requested and was joined by several other county clerks, 27 in fact. As just a frame of reference, we have 33 counties in the state of New Mexico. And they asked that the court make a ruling that there would be no in-person polling or voting for early or election day, and everybody would be sent a ballot. Now, to bring this request to the Supreme Court was done by the Republican Party of the state of New Mexico. They said that the state court can't be making these rules unilaterally. The more appropriate place for it to be happening is in the state legislature, where they would make adjustments there. The Supreme Court agreed with some of the arguments, but they also encouraged all the county clerks as well as the Secretary of State to push absentee voting, which is already permitted in our state, as much as possible, both in an awareness campaign, a campaign to get people to request it, so that way they can reduce the amount of people who are converging to vote. There was also a discussion around limiting polling locations. However, the court has asked that there would be facilities for the minimum required, which is different in different counties based off of different populations. So New Mexico, long story short, we still have in-person voting for our primary. It is coming up mid-May. Again, I will give you those dates here shortly. And so you can request your absentee ballot now, or if you choose to vote in person, which is your prerogative, you are able to do so. Now, where can you go to request your absentee? Oh, here we go. Here was another example of how the Secretary of State is encouraging these absentee ballots. So to request your ballot, go to nmvote.org. You're going to click on Update My Voter Registration or to request your absentee ballot, and you'll see a page just like this. What you need to have on hand is your driver's license and your social security number. From there, you can request your absentee ballot, but your first page looks like this, very simple. What I had found with this page too is that I was going around playing with it with my husband. He still didn't have his voter registration updated. It was still at an address we were living at a year ago. And so we were able to simply go in there, update his voter registration and what district we actually live in now. And it got to us within a week. Then he requested his absentee, and it was really that simple. So if it's something you would like to do, it took us no more than 4 minutes, 5 minutes. And it was incredibly simple, and it kind of keeps our household a little bit safer. Now, important dates, something I've been promising this whole presentation. So now through May 5th, which is, oh goodness, is that Tuesday, I believe? You can update your voter registration at nmvote.org. You can also already request your absentee ballot. Those are going to start being mailed out on May 5th. May 16th is the day that early voting starts. And then May 28th, if you had requested your absentee ballot, you need to mail it back so it can be accounted for. Finally, our primary, June 3rd. And all of this is leading up into November 3rd, which is really going to be where whatever we do now during the primary is going to make a difference. If we see increased cases of COVID-19 or we don't see any at all, that's going to be a huge indication of how we're going to vote in that general election. With that, that's my presentation. I want to make a few plugs. If you're not already a member, I know that we had several members join us today, but if you're not, please consider supporting our work. We are releasing our scorecard in a couple weeks, and being a member gets you first and exclusive access to that. And what it captures is our lawmakers working together to address their education, crime, and quality of life issues. I know it's a very challenging time for many, and I appreciate if that's not something that's feasible for you right now, please continue to tune into what we're sharing, because knowledge is power. And regardless of your membership, I want to make sure that everybody has access to this kind of information that allows them to be more educated voters. Our next webinar, as I had mentioned, we're going to continue working through webinars as long as they're popular and people are responding to them, is next week. It's actually going to be on Thursday, the 7th at 10 a.m., same time frame. And I'm really, really excited about this one. It's about education and the impact that COVID-19 has had on New Mexico's education system. And so I'm going to have 3 different panelists. The first one is Jenna Hagengruber. She is a Sandia High School freshman English teacher. She's going to talk about how these changes have had her adapt her lesson plans, how she's trying to keep students engaged, and the challenges that have ensued from that. The second person is Amanda Aragon from New Mexico Kids Can. They're an education advocacy and policy group. Amanda is someone that I sit next to often up in the Roundhouse and listen to her really analyze the legislation that's being brought forth, finding new solutions that we can address education in New Mexico. And what she's going to talk about is, from a policy side, what is going to need to be done to make sure that students are on grade level when they go back to school in the fall? What other things can be done to ensure that although New Mexico is on the wrong end of pretty much every education list nationally, how can we stop slipping, especially with this massive disruption to the way that we teach our kids? The final person is Tammy Thomas. She is a New Albuquerque resident, working mom who has had to since I guess it's mid-March, work from home, but not only do that and keep up with all the responsibilities she has 2 young boys in elementary school. And she is trying to homeschool them and keep them engaged with their teachers and get their coursework done. And she's going to tell us about the challenges that has presented, ideas she may have for both policy and educators to move forward, and the concerns where she doesn't know if her kids are actually learning at the rate that they should be. So I really think that this group of women is really going to present a great conversation, a thoughtful one, and hopefully provide some solutions that maybe we can bring up to legislators. So join us then. It's Thursday the 7th at 10 a.m. We'll send out emails. It will also be on Facebook Live. I appreciate it. Now with that, I've had a few questions come in. Let me do a quick time check. Oh, almost perfect timing. Talked for like 26 minutes. So let's see our questions. So yes, as I had mentioned before, the PowerPoint will be available for printing. I'll email that to you after. Next question from Stephen Garcia. Are there any measures in place with the state to ensure that bipartisan vote counting with mail-in and absentee votes? This is my biggest fear and opinion. So nothing that has been made public. So the Secretary of State and the county clerks have repeatedly said that every year they have the utmost integrity in their counting of ballots. Now, when it's moving forward, what are they going to do to perhaps get eyes from both sides of the aisle overseeing that process? Nothing new has come out. There was a lot of concern last year in the race down in, I guess it's Congressional District 2. I can't recall off the top of my head, but it was between Yvette Harrell and Xochitl Torres Small, and absentee ballots coming up a little bit after the reporting of real-time mailing and whether or not that process was done with the most integrity. The Yvette Harrell campaign did not believe so. They aimed to sue the state for it. The state swore up and down that they did it correctly. So that's something that we're coming off of because that wasn't so long ago, but no new announcements have been made in how that would be addressed. Thank you for the question. Are there any other questions? Let's see. Answer. I think I'm good on my end. Let me see real quick. I know, Anna, you're tuning in. Have we gotten anything on Facebook? If you want to drop them in the chat or text them to me. Let's see. I think we're good. If you have any questions though, after this, perhaps maybe I didn't even answer all of your questions and this just brought up more questions for you. That is certainly something that could happen, and let me know. Email me at rsamuel@viantenm.org. I'd be happy to figure out the answers for you. Finally, I just want to reiterate what we do at Viante. So our purpose is to engage New Mexicans in the political process so they can see the change that they need. We have many working New Mexicans who really don't fall so definitively in the left or right column. What they want is an education system that works, where they can be assured that their kids are going to leave high school and our New Mexico education system better for it and be able to go to college or into a career. We want a New Mexico that is safe, where we're not waking up in the morning and wondering if our vehicles are there. We want a New Mexico where there are opportunities for employment, for people who are impoverished to rise up. We want a New Mexico that is all around better, and we know that we can accomplish this if we work together. Far too often, we see our lawmakers going into their parties and into their corners, and it's a battle. They pick very controversial issues to spend the most amount of time on, and things that are common ground are dying because they can't make it out of committee, and they're spending so much time talking about things that they're never going to agree on. So I'm trying to repair that disconnect of those lawmakers and their behavior and the desire of New Mexicans to have those lawmakers work together to fix these things that we all see that don't have a political affiliation to the issue. So that's what we're about, is empowering New Mexicans with information about how our elected officials are performing and what they can do to be a part of the change to find a way forward for our state. In fact, that's our name. Viante is a made-up word rooted in the Latin phrase via ante, which means way forward, because we know that New Mexico has so much to offer, from our beautiful landscapes, as you can see right here in my slideshow, to the great deal of natural resources that we can leverage and the unique character and culture. We shouldn't be on the wrong end of every national list. And by joining together, we can find a way forward for New Mexico. With that, I'm gonna let everyone go. Thank you for your time this morning. I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe. Again, to plug that date, it's Thursday the 7th at 10 a.m. We're gonna be talking about education, and I really hope that you can join us. I think that's gonna be a really engaging conversation, not just me talking to you, and it's gonna bring ideas from people who are experiencing these issues in education every day and perhaps have questions that you do. So join us, we'll send out that email, and I'll see you next time.